Welcome, listeners. You found Sanctuary's Coffee and Conversation program. My name is Myrna Haskell. I'm the executive editor of Sanctuary Magazine. This is an online magazine for women that empowers and inspires with a focus on the arts, humanitarian pursuits, health and wellness, inspirational travel, career, and finance. You can find us at sanctuary-magazine.com. Today, my guest is Dr. Carla Manly. She is a clinical psychologist, a relationships expert, and she is also the author of the newly published book, Date Smart. Thank you so much for joining me on the show, Carla. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me. It's great to see you. Thank you.
And Carla is out in sunny California, and I'm sure she's having better weather than we've had here in the Northeast, but it's great to connect this way. It's so good to finally see you. I want to let listeners know, though, that Carla's been involved in the magazine previously. She was actually one of our experts for our interactive Ask an Expert section. You can find her there talking about dating after divorce. But today we're going to talk about long-term relationships, some of the problems that arise when it's time to cut the cord and move on. And to start this out, though, I thought we'd just discuss a little bit the opposite of long-term, and that's the honeymoon phase. So I wanted to ask you, Carla, as an expert, how long does that usually last? That butterflies in the stomach, you can't wait to see him or her, and you're overlooking maybe some things that might annoy you 2 to 10 years later. How long does that last?
It's such a good question, because we often think of that limerence stage. It's called the limerence stage or the honeymoon stage. We often think of that as lasting 6 months, sometimes up to a year. But I really caution people that it can be of shorter duration or longer duration, depending upon how much you see the person. And you might think, oh, well, that's obvious, but for some people it's not. They'll say, oh, my girlfriend and I, or my boyfriend and I are still in the honeymoon phase, but they see each other once a month for trips to the ocean. And so they continue the honeymoon phase because they're not getting to that part of the relationship where they're experiencing the ins, the outs, the ups, the downs. And so really, it's about the quality and quantity of time that you spend with someone. And the more time you spend with someone, the more likely you are to experience those ups and downs of those natural fluctuations in life that help dissipate that honeymoon experience just a little sooner.
Right. And so I would imagine then maybe, these long distance relationships that some couples have too. Right, that might be a bit about what you're talking about too, because then it's a forced separation in many cases, or they might just see each other on weekends. So that's good. I'm glad you pointed that out. You're right. It's that the problems start to arise when it's that daily, life stuff comes up, the drudgery of kind of the sameness of everything, your daily tasks and everything, and then that relationship not quite being so, it sparks every time you see the person. But so you're in this relationship now a little bit more long term. And so I was hoping you might tell listeners a little bit about what are some of the common problems that might arise in a long-term romantic relationship.
Yes, and what happens is, as we get to know someone, reality sets in. And the illusions tend to naturally fade. And it's more of a problem if two people show up in the early stages of a relationship really authentically. This is who I am. These are my weaknesses. These are my strengths. I'm working on my weaknesses. Then we continue to tend to evolve in really healthy ways. However, if one or both partners show up in the early stages really having a mask on or several masks on, as those masks tend to float away and we see the real person underneath, that can make the adjustment more jarring. It can bring up lots of trust and betrayal issues. So it really depends on the quality of the relationship. So if two people are really honest with each other from the get-go, they tend to encounter natural hurdles, like how to deal with finances, how to deal with any children that are already in the picture or children that might be coming into the picture, how to deal with sexual issues that, might be problematic. And so those are some of the most common things we run into. But in cases where people really weren't, one or both people weren't honest from the get-go, that's where we really start seeing some issues crop up, whether it's financial surprises or sexual surprises or relationship history surprises, or, you know, all sorts of things that can come up. And most of those, again, are rooted in a lack of authenticity from the beginning, where if you knew something about somebody, for example, you know, somebody hides alcoholism from you or drug addiction from you, but you find out later, of course, it's going to be a major hurdle, because if you had known a bit about it from the beginning, you might go, goodness, you know, not the right relationship for me, and you would have parted ways early on.
I see. So, you know what I was thinking about too, and I think most of us do this in the beginning, is that you're on your best behavior, so to speak, right? So, I think that probably naturally happens. Are you talking more about, you know, it's after the first couple of dates and now you're hiding things? You mentioned alcoholism and other problems you should be upfront with the person about early on so that they know who you really are deep down inside. Because I think we all, I don't know, I think I did that anyway, I'm not sure. And then the other thing that you pointed out that I wanted to discuss just a little bit further is I heard you mention children. You know, I'll be married 30 years this year. And I remember those days when our kids, I have two of them, were babies. I mean, the romance is thrown out the window. You know what I mean? Because you're piled high in diapers and sleepless nights and, you know, baby barf and like all of that stuff that's not very sexy, you know?
It's not very sexy.
And and do you find that couples who can get through those times that are a little more difficult, or maybe a spouse has a job that's very demanding and they're traveling a lot and there's pressures there, if they are able to get through those, that they come out better on the other side?
Absolutely. You're getting to what I believe is the heart of a long-term relationship. I think and I talk about this in almost all of my books, which is the point that we tend to have diluted terms, very important terms like friendship and relationship, to where anyone can be a friend on Facebook or whatever. If I know you, you're my friend, right?
Right.
Diluted, and anything can be a relationship. A one-night stand can be a relationship. And I go back to the true essence of those two words. So for me, a friendship is someone who treats you with dignity, courtesy, respect, kindness. You know, I have a very clear definition of friendship. Relationship is relating. And if we go back to the etymology of the word relationship, it is about relating back and forth. Latticing is where the word comes from. So latticing, sharing life's goods, bads, the ups, the downs, the health, the, you know, the hurt, all of that. And so when we are in a true relationship, not one that's disposable or merely transactional, which a lot of, not judging, but a lot of relationships are transactional. So if you're in a deep loving relationship, what I have found is that those lifetimes, those times in life, the babies, the financial distress, the, you know, the illnesses, they actually become almost privileges. And I'm not overstating that. I believe that if you love someone very deeply and are in it for the long term, as challenging as it might be, the babies, the lack of, you know, sexiness when you're breastfeeding and all of that, and, you know, that if we kind of tweak it and really work to see the positive in it, the growth in it. How can we make this sexy? How can we make this delightful? Okay, you're in the hospital. How can I be here with you and love you more and more deeply? So I believe that when we are able to pull up our best selves, which is often really hard because life is really challenging, it is really challenging. But if we are constantly trying to evolve as our best selves, then we are able to bring that friendship and that relationship quality into life. And that makes our relationships not disposable, but necessary.
Oh, I like that. Yes. And they are necessary. Close relationships and long-term relationships is what builds us into the people that we are, right? How we maintain those. I'm wondering though, I heard you mention finance and some other issues that arise. What types of serious problems can, couples get through and come out the other side? What can be repaired in a relationship that you've seen in your experience as a psychologist?
I believe the answer to that question of what can be repaired, I think that almost anything can be repaired if, big caveat here,
Okay.
if both people are willing to come to the table with honesty and forgiveness, right? And if both people are willing to come to the table to acknowledge, particularly the person, if there's only one person who's, erred or really done something big, come to the table with a true apology and responsibility taking and work to build the trust and safety that was broken. And if those pieces are available, the forgiveness, the willingness to take responsibility and do the heavy lifting. Trust takes a long time often to form. We don't realize
Yes.
it, but it takes a long time to form. And it's so quick to break. We can break trust that we've built over.
Oh, that's such a good point.
Yes, we can
Yeah,
break it.
it can be broken suddenly, right?
Oh, so suddenly.
Yeah, and I wanted to dig in a little bit to the infidelity piece because I've just from my experience with some friends I've had in the past, that's an issue that can be really difficult to get over or get through, maybe I should say, more or less. Have you helped couples with this and what can couples do when there is infidelity, especially maybe even on one side, but sometimes it's on both sides, right? How can couples get through to the other side from that without it causing, maybe they feel like it's over, but then something else comes up and because that trust was initially broken, it starts affecting everything else and they start not trusting even on other things. How do you help couples get through infidelity?
Oh, it's such a good question and such a deep one. So infidelity, whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, we have broken, whether it's one, if it's one person, that person has broken the trust. If it's both people, they've both broken the trust. And in the realm of psychology, we talk about rupture and repair. Rupture and repair. And in this case, if there's infidelity, there was a huge rupture,
Right.
and the repair is necessary. And everybody's needs for repair are different. Some people want to know every detail of the infidelity, what, why, when, where, who, how. Other people just want to rebuild the trust. Other people want to walk out the door and dispose of the relationship.
Right.
And I can't judge any of that, but what I can say is if the relationship is important enough to both people and really emphasizing both people, then the work is to dig into what caused the person to be unfaithful. And I'm not a person who's really big on taking excuses like, oh, you weren't sexual enough with me, or oh, this, or oh, that. I'm about, hey, look at why you chose, because it doesn't happen by chance. Somebody chose to be unfaithful. It is a choice. Why did you choose to be unfaithful? Let's get to the roots of that. And how can we build trust going forward so that your partner will know that you will not choose that in the future, that instead you will choose to move toward the partner to work through whatever's happening rather than going round, going back behind the scenes and doing something that is not healthy for you, for the relationship or your partner, and then doing the work that's necessary. And I've helped many couples through this. There's a lot of work and a lot of time. And the other thing that's really important, Myrna, is that if one of the, if the person who's been cheated on, for example, has other betrayal issues, maybe from childhood, maybe from former relationships, then we have to acknowledge that that trust building may be even more intensive because that person was already hurting and was counting on this partner to never hurt that wound. And here the partner's hurt that already,
Right.
that existing wound.
And I think lots of times the person who's been cheated on too might feel like it was something they did wrong, this other person who cheated with their spouse or long-term, relationship, that they're better, they're prettier, they're, smarter, or whatever it is. But does it boil really down to that there was a problem or a break in the relationship initially for that to actually happen? What have you found in your experience?
No, it's such a good question again. If the person who was betrayed is feeling as though it's their fault,
Right,
it's not your fault. And here's why. You are not responsible for the actions of the other person. If you had an agreement with this person to be faithful until death do us part or relationship formally break up, it is not your fault. That does not mean that there might not be a part of yourself where you can look at and say, was I showing up in the relationship as best I could? And if not, like, were you being present emotionally? Were you being loving? And if you weren't, it's still not your fault because you didn't cause that person to do something else, but you might take the moment to look and say, well, how can I show up with more love in my relationship? So that's what I would limit that to. But as far as the person who betrayed, that was their choice, 100% their responsibility. No one made them cheat. They chose to
right,
do that. So was it always a break in the relationship? Absolutely not. Sometimes this other person over here who was cheated on is showing up with love and attention and everything. And I don't care how much prettier or attractive or whatever the other person was, the relationship can't be broken if the unfaithful person doesn't open the door to it.
right, right.
Right. And so
And yeah.
yeah.
And is that how you counsel folks who, may have a lower self-esteem and right away they always blame themselves on things? Because I think they probably are doing that in other aspects of their life as well, right? Something might go wrong at work or right away, it's my fault, I did something, right? And maybe it wasn't their fault, but are you able to, do you find that through counsel, people can build up their self-esteem and then maybe that's part of the healing? With a better self-esteem, they can move forward and trust again?
Absolutely. Well, the self-esteem isn't necessarily tied to the trust. The self-esteem is that part of knowing I am a good person, I am worthy, I am valuable, I deserve to be treated with dignity, with kindness, respect, with empathy. That's where self-esteem comes from, that really core place. So the person who was unfaithful have maybe often even plants thoughts into the person's head that they're not pretty enough or handsome enough or good enough or worthy enough. And often that's part of the dynamic. So the work, again, if we're talking about self-esteem, that's each person's individual journey. Often the person who cheats has very low self-esteem, even though they may appear confident. And they're very different things. Self-confidence is very different from self-esteem. Even though they may appear self-confident, most people who really value themselves and other people will not be unfaithful.
I see. So
So
that's where you really want to dig in early in the relationship and really get to know the person well, right?
yes.
Are there times that you feel and that you've seen through your experience where there's nothing else a couple can do? It's time to cut the cord and move on because the relationship can't be repaired and it's just not going to work. Are there any signs? Like, is there anything that you've seen? Oh, from your professional standpoint, this couple's just not going to make it because several things have been tried and there's just a wall there that's not going to be broken down.
Again, another great question. I never make the determination in my heart or my head. I try very hard not to be the one who makes the determination that this can't be saved. Now, part of that I have to chalk up to the fact that I'm an eternal optimist. The other part that I have to chalk it up to is that that's not my decision. And the moment I put that into my head, I might somehow unconsciously guide a couple towards separating, which that's not my job. My job is to guide them to decide, do they have the desire to stay or do they have the desire to go, separate from each other. And so what I work with people on is, and I will often see lots of signs that here's this is the piece, that if one partner is not showing up emotionally to work on the relationship, that to me is almost 100% of the time the signal that they will choose to go their separate ways. Because if you don't have both people fully in wanting to repair it, the people will they'll do one of two things essentially. They'll choose to stay and just live like roommates in this transactional relationship because they're afraid of going their separate ways, or they will go their separate ways because they know it's irreparable or not worth staying. So, but if you have both people again saying, I want this, I want to make this work, I love you deeply, and I'm willing to show that love by doing the work in here and out there. And when I hear that and see that energy, there's just magic. Repair happens.
Then you know it's gonna be okay. So it has to be both people. They both have to put the work in, even if it's more of one person's fault in the case of maybe somebody was, cheating on the other person or whatever it is. But then even questions of, finances and a loss of a job, or, a child who gets very, very sick. I know there's cases that I've seen where couples have actually gotten closer over something like that, but then that also sometimes pulls couples apart. So I think I'm hearing you say, even with those big time life changes that are very difficult, if couples can get through it together, they come out the other side even stronger than where they started, right?
Said so beautifully. Yes, exactly. And that is why I'm such a believer, one of the many reasons I'm such a believer in therapy, because sometimes all a couple needs, all we need as individual, is just a little bit of objectivity. Somebody from the outside saying, wait a second, let's do a reset here. Or let's use this, let's reframe it here. And sometimes when we do that, we're like, oh, I can do that. And so I am a big believer that our challenges can truly bring us closer together, because most people can get along fine when life is easy and good.
Right.
It's the challenges that really show us not only what we need to work on as individuals, because I believe, we're all imperfect. I'm certainly imperfect and will continue to evolve for the rest of my life, right? That's the journey, is to keep evolving. And I think that relationships, that's one of the biggest gifts of relationships, that they give us an area where we have someone to push. I call it pushing up against someone, where there's another person. And if you're both growing together, pushing up against each other, you're constantly taking each other to the next level in the most beautiful way.
So you grow together and you grow better together in that case.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
Well, Carla, I know we have some listeners that want to hear a little bit more about you. So I was hoping maybe you want to say a little something about Date Smart. It was published last summer, I believe, right? You could tell us a little bit about your book, or if you offer virtual services, what types of services you offer.
Okay, my private practice is in California, so I do my private clinical sessions in California. My practice is very full, but I love my clients. And let's see, I also do speaking and I do seminars, and I'm also an author of 3 books. But the most recent, as you said, is right here. This lovely little baby, Date Smart: Transform Your Relationships and Love Fearlessly. And as with all my books, what I really love about books like what I write is that they're not just your regular self-help book. Every book has exercises in it, so that they're not a replacement for therapy, but they can be an adjunct to therapy. So sometimes when we read a self-help book and it's like, oh, great, that sounded good, and then we get back to regular life.
Right.
But what I believe we need, and I even do this with my clients, I give homework, because it's through our homework exercises, the journaling exercises and all of that, that we get a chance to actually put our thoughts into some sort of, we're able to formulate them, see them in writing, do some internal work, that then we can manifest the change in our lives. And so Date Smart, it's not just for people who are dating, it's for people who are choosing to not date. And I've gotten feedback from people who have been in long-term relationships who have read it. One is a mom of like 5 kids who said it just really helped her be a better mom and a better wife, because basically what it boils down to, talking about self-esteem, I really work from an inside out way, that if we know ourselves, build our self-esteem, build our personal awareness, Not that we'll ever be perfect, but we're more aware of who we are. And then it helps us be better partners and then draw the right partner to us. And it also, if we're in relationship, helps us be a better mate, build a better relationship, and bring the best out in our partners. So
Oh, that's great. That sounds wonderful. That sounds like a wonderful read for our audience. So everyone, if you could just hang on for just a minute or two longer, I'm going to post Carla's website, and I'm sure that the various resources and books, there's links there where you can go to purchase her book or learn more about her. But I just want to thank you again, Carla. This has been wonderful. It's February, so one of our themes this month is relationships, and I was so happy to hear you were willing to come on and talk to me about this, because we do have an audience who have been in really long-term relationships, either a spousal relationship or otherwise. It doesn't have to obviously be a spousal relationship, but I know a lot of our listeners wanted to hear what they could do if they are having trouble, or maybe they could even help a friend. So this has been an absolutely great conversation, and I thank you very, very much.
thank you.
I'd like to close, as I always do, though, by wishing all of our listeners and our readers good health, happiness, and continued inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us.